you're not looking, by the way, at how it's going to be.
Right.
This is the main display room, the story of radio, and the story of broadcasting is back there.
Okay.
What we have set up on 2 long sets of tables here are items for our auction.
Okay.
So that's not normal. Normally what we'd have is by decade displays telling the story of radio from the beginning to the modern times,
Gotcha.
of which only one of the decades is set up right now. That's the one I'm going to be dose-setting today. There's a lot of history in this building, which I can explain. So
yeah, I would love to hear it.
Okay, well let's start at the beginning.
Okay.
Then. Paul's my partner. Maybe we tag team. I don't know how we're going to do it. So it kind of starts with this building, which is from 1900. And it was the first telephone exchange in Alameda.
Okay.
So back then, if you wanted to make a telephone call, you had to make a call to a central office, and they would then patch you into whoever you wanted to talk to. So that's what this was built for. The company was called Sunset Telephone and Telegraph.
Okay.
Why Sunset? Because if you look that way, you can watch the sunset.
Oh, okay.
So they did telegraph, and then they morphed into telephone. So they were doing both.
Okay.
But this building was primarily for telephone.
Okay.
That's why this was built. Now, the story of communication goes back before wireless. So we're going to describe what happened from 1900 to 1920 in this little exhibit.
Okay.
But in 1900, Marconi was, messing around with his apparatus and making demonstrations, but we really didn't have any wireless service. In 1900, it was telegraph. And it had been around for already 50 years and was very well developed. So we have here a little station here that might represent a telegraph or a office in a railway station of a rural town or something like that. It's modest. And then we have over here something a little more elaborate, and that would be more like what you find in a central office or a larger entity. And these are operational. So this end of it would be responsible for energizing the wire that would be carried on telegraph poles all the way to the remote station. Just a single wire is all they used back then to do that. These poles were about 25 feet tall, and they were about 200-foot separation. So a lot of poles. They ran generally along the railroad tracks because that was the right-of-way that railways had, and they wanted to communicate. They were one of the very first users. So
it's also easier to service and things because you could go to a railroad car rather than the middle of nowhere.
A whole lot easier, and you did have to service them because the line failure was
probably pretty common.
Pretty common, yeah. So imagine now you're at this little station, and right now we don't have the garb for you to wear, but we will later.
I have to wear garb.
Well, we were going to have the visor and the vest, on a Wells Fargo office, right? We don't have that yet. Anyway, you can step over here and imagine that you're going to be sending a message over to that office. Okay? And so this has been set up for that. This office is ready to receive. This office is ready to transmit. And these are some of the things you can send with Morse code.
Okay.
Doing something now.
So if you wanted to send, for example, hello or hi, you would send that.
It's just like 3 taps. And then you hear it over
and
there.
then a space, and again.
And then
Right, and so what's happening here is it's sending energy along the wire over to there, and it's making this sounder go off.
okay.
And so you're hearing this over here, and you're copying it down. And that's the way it would work. So Yeah, so you just sent. Okay, and in actual practice, probably wouldn't say hi. You'd probably say, I am. Well, they use one or two letter designations for the remotes. Yeah, so you might send a particular letter, and then they'd say, oh, that's such and such depot.
Gotcha.
And then they would send it back to you. Now, to go back and forth, you'd have to
Switch.
close that and open up this. These are the levers where the send and receive. So you can go ahead now, you can send a signal back.
Okay.
Yeah, so it was copied by ear.
Wow.
But when the traffic got really heavy, when things got very mature, then they were using these automatic systems. And so you had a tape driven by a clock motor, and it would go through in an inker.
I think we've seen those like in war movie, like reels, documentaries from war, where they would have something like that.
Yeah,
that would.
then they had the stock tickers, which were similar.
Anything
Okay.
financial,
Was
they
it?
would want to
Okay.
record it if they could. The simpler stations would just use the ear, but these were called registers, and they would actually record it, and then they would take the tape over to somebody else who would transcribe it. So that's the way these simple
I think they had
systems work.
machines eventually that would do that too, kind of like the punch paper tape readers we got later.
There were embossers, there were inkers, there were different ways to mark the tape.
And they were invented and modified by Edison. Thomas Edison started the telegraph.
Yeah. So Thomas Edison, inventor of the light bulb,
Right.
Was an excellent telegrapher.
Yes.
Okay.
And
I mean, a
he-
crack guy.
he could be a page behind. Oh yeah, they would send. One of the days they wanted to see how good he was. So they had one of their high-speed guys at one of the other stations send stuff to see how well he could copy. And so the guy was sending extremely fast for the time. And what happened was, he started writing. Of course, the guy was getting faster and faster. So his writing got very small. He wrote very clearly all his life. He wrote his
Really?
And so he was writing and writing and writing. He actually ended up a page behind, but he had kept it in his mind. And when it's ended, he finished writing it out, and he told the guy, send it the other foot. He was one of the best telegraphers.
So he was almost deaf, and it was getting worse and worse. And so when he was courting this woman, he taught her the Morse code. And sometimes they would converse that way. So one day, over perhaps dinner or romantic evening, she's got her hand on. I'll have to borrow your hand. Okay, so put your hand down right here. He just reached over. What do you think he said?
I love you.
Will you marry me?
Oh, will you marry me? Oh my
And
goodness.
she types back.
Yes. Right?
That's the way it
Okay.
was.
Edison had a hard time because he was deaf from a young age. And so when they wanted to honor him at various, he got all kinds of.
Right.
What they had, when the telegrapher guys wanted to get in the war, because he invented all this, they actually had keys at each table. And that's how they communicated, because he could hear the clicks, because that was
Within the range of his hearing.
Edison's deafness was okay for a lot of things, because he kept him from being distracted. But the sad part was,
No worries.
the sad part is that he insisted on approving every record, every recording that would be sold by his companies.
Oh, wow.
And we have a deaf guy deciding what sounds good.
What sounds good? I understand that.
Yeah, Edison had his weak spots.
So moving on here to some of the other stories, but letting you know how extensive this telegraph system was. Here's a photograph of New York, and what's that?
Oh, all those wires.
Those
oh
are
my
all
goodness. All telegraph
telegraph wires.
Wow.
No power lines in those days. They hadn't been invented yet. So that's how extensive it was. And the central offices were so busy that the couriers were on roller skates.
I remember seeing a movie about that. I can't remember what movie
and
it
they
was.
used to have, and every business had a little box about this big, and each one had a different code.
Okay.
And so you
Turn it to
turn
the
it. Well,
telling an
it's like
address.
Well, no, what you did is you rotated it, and then it was spring driven, and it would operate a key that would send out a certain message, a certain pair of letters or whatever. And it would go to the central office of the telegraph guy, and they'd know to come to your business to pick up a telegram.
Oh, wow.
So that's the only way you can communicate the fact that you wanted to, the call box. The system is still used. At least it is in San Francisco. All the fire department, the fire boxes on the street that you push down, they work on the same principle. You push down, the thing springs up, it sends a code to the dispatch office, and they know which alarm went off.
That's interesting.
Nothing's changed.
And none of these parts came from the same manufacturer, and I'm sure they were all used at the time that he got a hold of them.
Yeah, hams used to buy their own stuff, and kids would buy their own stuff and put it together.
Right.
And there were no hams at this time.
Well, they would they hadn't called them hams.
They were radio
Right.
experimenters, and there was no league that they had. They were just doing their own thing. They were rebels. So those are called wet saws. The ones that you use today, you buy in a blister pack. Well, we don't actually know without figuring out which metal is used, but a wet battery is nothing more than worth 1.5 volts.
Okay.
In order to power up one of these telegraph lines, which used these batteries to energize them, they had banks and banks of them underneath the bench.
Okay.
Up to 100 of these. They'd have to strap together in order to overcome the losses if the line was long.
Right.
So the experimenters, they would get a hold of these, maybe even make their own out of fruit jars, and they would use it to power this.
Right.
And so this is only about a 20 water, and that's the input power. The output's a tiny fraction of that. But it was enough to have fun with and go across town.
Right.
There's no antenna on this one for a number of reasons. One of them is
The
these are
FCC
illegal.
would get mad.
These are
Right.
illegal. But,
Bombers would drop out of the sky.
yeah,
Bad things could happen.
But since nobody will be able to trace you, we're going to have you press the key. So come around.
All right.
Come around and
He's going to use your call sign, so don't worry about it.
so first we're going to energize.
Right. So you got to power it.
Go ahead.
All right.
This is the safe part. This is the dangerous part.
Right.
That's right. Now, watch that spark gap.
Okay. Get an angle here.
And why is it not going?
That's a good question. Is the battery hooked up? Yep. That's the same one I use.
I'm gonna take a good look at it.
Well, I see you put the black tape so people can see it better.
Yeah.
So there's a spark jumping, and then if you had to let you know what it looked like, I've just got a regular old AM radio.
Yeah.
Beautiful tone.
Sounds great.
That's
The problem is, they had a very broad frequency on those things, so what happened would be if too many of them got on, they would interfere with one another.
Just like-
which is what happened
Yeah,
with the
just like-
Titanic. Which
Okay.
is when they decided that they had to start licensing and organizing and
Giving people frequencies to, yeah.
So they didn't have
Crystal
don't have
radios,
set up to operate, but you tune them by sliding this in and out, and then a crystal of galena would create that sound.
Okay.
You have a pair of headphones on,
Right.
and you hear the
you should have set the headphones with this.
yeah. The idea of broadcasting was alien. I mean, this whole business model of, oh, we're going to put out a program, or it's going to be pay per listen, or it's going to be commercials or whatever. It's some sort of a business model. Alien. No one thought that made any sense. It was just like strange. And so bit by bit, different people on both coasts actually were playing around with transmitting some voice over these telegraph transmitters. Now they were crude. There's an example of a microphone
Right.
that would be used to modulate that awful snarl so you could get something. But they were playing around with it. And on our own West Coast, we have documentation from 1909. This is in San Jose. And so a guy by the name of Doc Harold ran his own radio school, and he set up this station. And the source of the broadcasting was the very early Victrola radio set. You see he's got one right there? It's a crank, and we've got one right over here. So these, yeah, so you just crank them up.
My dad had one of these.
So they would bring the crude microphone up to there, and they would broadcast some of this music. And of course, there were no commercial receivers.
Right.
People with these homemade apparatus would pick it up, but actually developed a little bit of a following around San Jose. And of course, you need somebody to talk about what
What's
they're
playing,
doing.
right.
So who's going to do it? His wife.
Oh.
So Sybil was the first DJ,
Oh, that's
and
so
that's her.
cool.
Their little kid.
They're-
Yeah.
That's awesome.